This meeting of the City of Eugene Budget Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming inside on this gorgeous day. So first of all, I wanted to just make a quick note for everyone. Lori Mate, who was part of our committee, is no longer part of the group. It turns out that her address was outside of city limits, so she is ineligible. So, and I believe that council will make a new appointment in June, right? June? Yeah, so just FYI in case you're wondering why she's no longer with us. So in the packet that you received, there were minutes from the meeting in May 12th of 2015 and November 18th of 2015. No one emailed any comments or changes ahead of time, so just wanted to ask if there were any comments or changes suggested. No? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
So moved.
Is there a second? Great, super. So all in favor of approving these two sets of minutes as written, please indicate aye.
Aye.
Aye. And leave your hands up so the staff can record, sorry. Okay. All opposed, same sign? No? Okay, great, thank you. Our next order of business is actually to elect a new chair and vice chair for the group. And we do have two people who've indicated interest, and that is Ken Beeson and Chelsea Clinton, although I believe officially they both need to be nominated. So, if anyone would like to nominate those individuals, Josh.
Can I nominate? I was going to nominate them both at the same time, but I'll start with Chelsea.
Procedurally, let's probably do it one at a time.
I would nominate Chelsea.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, great. So Chelsea is nominated, and Claire.
I'll nominate Ken Beeson.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, super. So we have our two nominees, and I don't believe there's anyone else who expressed any interest. I asked the mayor to choose randomly to see who will have the first opportunity to share some thoughts about why they would like this position and what they would bring to the group. So Chelsea, you are selected to go first, so please take a couple minutes and just share with us why you're interested in the position, and then we'll have Ken do the same.
Good evening. My name is Chelsea Clinton. I am an economist and a researcher at the Oregon Department of Education. I've lived in Eugene about 7 years now. I moved here with my now husband to go to the University of Oregon, and we really fell in love with this community. It's a special place to live, as you all know. I just actually today finished a class through the Chamber of Commerce, and I just thought it was really appropriate to talk about. It's a community where the Chamber of Commerce has a full day on how the arts are important and how human services are important, along with economic development, which I think just really speaks to how our community comes together to look at difficult issues and to really work on our values together. And as my family is now expecting a little one in September, these values are all the more important to support and to help grow our community. So that's why I'm involved on the budget committee, and I'm really interested in stepping into a leadership role just because I've had the opportunity to experience this for a few years now. This is my 5th budget cycle. I think I have the perspective to help shape the conversations that we have about these tough choices and values, to really help push the conversation forward in a productive manner. So I'd appreciate your vote.
Great, thank you. Ken?
I'm Ken Beeson. I've also been on the budget committee for 5 years. This is my 5th year. I'll talk to you a little bit about why I'm interested and what I think I can contribute. I'm retired from eWeb, so I think most of you know. I worked there a little more than 30 years, so I have municipal utility experience. I'm also on the Human Services Commission and have been on it for 2 years, and I'm currently the chair of that group. I'm interested in being an active participant in helping to ensure that limited public resources are effectively used to serve Eugene citizens. And I think that's basically why I want to serve on the budget committee, and also why I'd like to be the chair. What I think I can contribute, I have the experience on the budget committee, and I think I have a good understanding of the roles of the various members of the committee, the roles of the chair, the vice chair. I have experience in helping to set agendas and manage meetings. I've been involved with a couple of different boards. I believe I have good working relationships with the people around this table, also good working relationships with the staff. And I have the time, I have the energy, and I've got commitment for this. So I believe in the value of public participation, and the Budget Committee, I think the work that we do here helps exemplify those values of participation. So I appreciate your consideration.
Great, thank you both very much. So we'll go ahead and vote for the chair position, and then depending on the outcome of that, I'll allow either of you to express an interest, or anyone else for that matter, in the vice chair role. Okay, so all those in favor of Chelsea Clinton for chair, please raise your hand and signify aye. Recording? Okay. All those in favor of Ken Beeson for chair? Okay, from my count, Twyla, check me if I'm wrong, I believe that Chelsea, you are the new chair. Congratulations. Thank you. Ken, are you interested in the role of vice chair?
I would be interested.
Okay, super. Is there anyone else who's interested in the role of vice chair who did not communicate that earlier? No? Okay. So all those in favor of Ken in the role of vice chair? Great. Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you both very much for your service and stepping into these roles. And you are now officially in charge.
I always love that part. And it starts now.
I will also pass you the official agenda. Yes.
I think at this point, I pass it off to the city manager for presentation.
Sure, thank you very much, and it's great to be back. Welcome back on such a beautiful day. And so I really want to talk briefly today about where we've been, just to set the context and the stage a little bit, and then, of course, talk about where we're headed, most specifically into the FY17 budget. I'll do a brief overview. I'll turn it over to Twyla to get into some of the details, and I'll come back to wrap it up for us. So really, if you remember over the last 7 or 8 years, we've had a series of principles that we've used that I think have served us well. And you might remember when we started down this journey, when the recession started in 2008, it quickly became a pretty significant budget gap in the general fund. And we talk about the general fund because that's what most people are thinking about or used to. And those are really the discretionary dollars that we have and that the Budget Committee spends most of their time talking about, but ultimately you approve the entire budget. And as you recall, over the last 7 years or so, there was a combined $30 million gap in the general fund in which the Budget Committee worked through. And we adhered to a number of principles as we did that. We said we wanted to have a very balanced approach, and we talked about balanced approach. We talked about balancing and maintaining community services. We also wanted to continue to respect our employees and minimize layoffs. We also wanted to continue to live within our means and then continue to have targeted investments in strategic priorities. One of the mantras that we have maintained throughout is only using one-time revenues for one-time expenditures. Another way of saying that is not using one-time revenues for ongoing expenditures. And we've stayed pretty consistent with that over time. We've also tried to have a prudent use of our reserves. And what that has allowed us to do by accumulating reserves at the appropriate time and based on what we knew into the future, it allows us to avoid overreacting or overcorrecting in any particular year so we can be thoughtful as we move forward in our budget. And so this balanced approach I mentioned is really about how do we continue to provide community services. And if you think about it over the last several years, while there have been impacts on community services, we have not across the board cut things out of the budget or cut services out into the community. What we've continued to maintain is it's important. The community relies on a whole host of things that the city provides, and therefore we want to continue to provide as much of the portfolio as possible. We also said that from an employee standpoint that they are important. We want to respect and honor their work. And if we were to go back and we can take a look at, we've eliminated 100 positions in the organization over the last many years, but with very few occasions, nobody has left the organization involuntarily, meaning they haven't been laid off. Now, there have been some changes internally. People have been shifted around and had to adjust to various work conditions, but what we've said is we want to maintain them as employees as we go forward. We've also invested in a variety of things from a strategic perspective, and you might remember and might know some of those are in the last 6 or 7 years, we're approaching $300 million of public and private investment in the downtown. And if you think about that kind of investment during the worst recession since the 1930s. The merger of the fire department is a significant investment from both communities in not only operational and providing services, but also as a way to ensure cost savings as we move forward. We can talk about the airport in which they've expanded and continue to grow and continue to set records and introduce new airlines and services. We've had any number of improvements in our community services as well as at libraries and those kinds of things. And so if you think about it, throughout that recession, this approach that you all have been taking has resulted in our ability to continue to live within our means, and I think get us to the point of FY17. And the good news for us is, again this year, and it's the same as we did last year in the Budget Committee, we're at a steady pace and there's no gap in the general fund to fill. And we think that's good news, given the place where we've been, and we've been able to be conservative but responsible in our budgeting and our fiscal stewardship. We also will introduce a few modest target investments to try to continue to move forward several of the priorities that the Council has asked us to take a look at. We are monitoring uncertainty. There are several pieces of the economy that continue to move that we need to be aware of and that we need to be conscious of and that we want to monitor. Things like future PERS increases, things like the rate of growth of property taxes, whether or not the rate of growth of silt will continue. It's down a little bit, and primarily because it's the seasons. Not many of us are turning on our heaters as much in the wintertime, and so our silt revenues are down as we're continuing to monitor those kinds of things. So there's several of those kinds of future revenue sources that we are monitoring. We're uncertain of at this time, but because of the prudent fiscal stewardship that we've shown over the last several years, it does give us an opportunity to continue to have a steady budget with no gap. We can monitor, and then as we move into next year, we can continue to see where that leads us to. We're also open to new opportunities as they arrive, and then again, what's important for us from a fiscal perspective is to continue to live within our means across the board. And so what it really means is as I briefly mentioned, and Twyla will talk more about this in detail, our revenue growth is a little bit slower than we anticipated last time we were together, so that has some impact. There are some expenditure uncertainties. PERS is one of those over the next several years that we're monitoring, and therefore we need to be conscious of that, and we're continually trying to achieve the right balance as we move forward. So this is our proposed FY17 budget. It's a little over $500 million. This is the entire budget, so it's general fund as well as the rest of our budget. And there's a couple of things that are probably of note, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. The capital budget is up over 25% of where it's been before. A lot of that is airport projects as well as transportation projects in response to bonds from the road bonds, for example. In the general fund, our operating budget is up 3.8%. So that's a portion of that operating $319 million up in the left-hand corner. It's good to note that that's actually a less increase than we had pre-recession, which was over 4%. And so we're maintaining a structural difference or a structural change that we accrued during the recession. And then we'll also get into a little bit more detail on a couple of these others. So here's the status of the funds from our perspective. The general fund is in a cautionary state, and the reason why I say that is it's steady, there's no gap to fill, but as I mentioned, there are several moving pieces in the out years that we need to be conscious of and reminded of as we move forward, and so we note that in the caution area. The ambulance transport fund is caution, but there's some really good news on the future. In the legislation this last year, the legislature passed a plan that would, Medicaid plan to increase reimbursements for Medicaid and what's eligible under reimbursements for ambulance services. And so we don't know the amount of money that actually represents. And so the rulemaking is underway at this moment. And so by the time we get into next year's budget, we'll have a much better sense of what that means. We anticipate some additional dollars into the system, which will help stabilize the ambulance transport fund and will balance the fund as well, the financial stability of the fund with the capacity needs as the call volume continues to increase. And so we're optimistic around that. The parking fund, it's a cautionary fund that's been pretty consistent over the last several years. It's operating within its means on a year-to-year basis. What it hasn't been able to do yet is accumulate the dollars to meet the deferred backlog in some of its capital projects. There are some things, current investments underway in technology that we believe will help position it better into the future. But we also know as redevelopment continues to occur in the downtown, there are parking spaces that go away. So for example, in the Whole Foods redevelopment, that used to be a parking lot, and so now it's no longer a parking lot, and so just there are spaces that leave the inventory, and so they're constantly trying to balance through that. So it's about a deferred maintenance capital investment that we're continuing to look at. Public Safety Answering Point Fund, it's really a statewide concern. It's not just a city concern, but the revenues are down. We collect them from the Oregon telephone excise taxes, but there are a decrease in the number of subscribers and devices, which then automatically decreases the total amount of revenue across the state, and our portion of that goes down proportionately. And so in the out years, we are working, we'll continue to work at a variety of levels to try to stabilize that funding, and it really is a statewide issue, and so we're hopeful in the future that that will make a difference. All the other funds are in stable condition, which is a positive as we move forward. We think that's good news. And on the capital side, again, it's a little over $40 million of capital projects. Transportation represents the greatest portion of that. And as you know, the community has passed road bonds, which we continue to execute. And that represents almost $9 million of that is from the 2012 street bonds. The airport capital includes the terminal building expansion that's underway right now, which is a little over $5.5 million, as well as there's a $4 million taxiway rehab project. And so we get a lot of leverage out of our airport funds with state and federal dollars. And then the general fund itself represents about a little over $3 million worth of projects. And Twyla, this is where you can take over for a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening. So while there are over 30 reporting funds and 100 sub-funds in the city, tonight we'll be talking about the general fund and the general fund forecast. The general fund has three components: the main sub-fund, the cultural services sub-fund, and the equipment replacement sub-fund. But tonight when I'm referring to the general fund, I'm referring to the main sub-fund. As John mentioned earlier, those are really the discretionary dollars for the city. They're not earmarked by council policy or statute for another purpose. And if you'd like to see a schedule of the main sub-fund, you can look on page 70 of your budget document. So the city prepares a 6-year financial forecast for the general fund. This is the planning tool that projects the financial condition of the general fund based upon what we know at this point in time. Staff and the executive team use this tool to understand the long-term impact of decisions that we make today. There are many drivers that affect the general fund revenues and expenditures, as are shown here, and we continually monitor these many factors as categories trend up or down over time. The constant we know to be true is that things will change in the future, and the further out that we look, the more uncertainty exists. As we will discuss tonight, there are both upside and downside risks for many of these drivers. I'm not going to address everything you see here on the slide this evening, but I'll talk about the major drivers and the areas of uncertainty we are monitoring. Property taxes continue to be the largest revenue source in the general fund at about 67% of general fund revenues, and I'll talk more about property taxes in a couple of slides. But let's start talking about state shared revenues. Those are trending down. We're forecasting $4.5 million in total in FY17, which is about 3.2% of general fund revenues. Each winter, we receive an updated projection from the League of Oregon Cities for alcohol and cigarette taxes. This year, projections are trending down from previous levels, particularly for the alcohol beverage tax. Revenue estimates for the city were reduced by almost $300,000 in FY17 for this revenue source. Additionally, cigarette tax are flat as smoking levels taper off. We also have a very conservative estimate for the marijuana tax in the forecast. So we're forecasting $20,000 for FY17 and $100,000 annually thereafter. We have not yet received information from the League or the Department of Revenue on the estimate for the City of Eugene or when we will actually start receiving marijuana tax revenue. This is a driver that will likely have an upward trend and a positive impact on the forecast as we move to the future, but we don't want to overestimate future revenues, and we'll be updating the forecast as we receive additional information. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about EWEB SILT, or contribution in lieu of taxes. Our forecast for FY17 is $13.2 million, or about 9.2% of general fund revenues. As the city manager mentioned earlier, SILT revenues are trending downward from previous projections. Actual SILT revenue in FY15 was about $400,000 less than EWEB's projections, which EWEB attributes to warmer than expected winter weather. This trend has continued into FY16, and we expect SILT revenue for the current year to come in about $200,000 under what we had previously budgeted. This recent experience has been applied to the general fund forecast in FY17 and beyond by reducing EWEB SILT projections to mirror the recent experience that we've seen in winter months. And while many other revenue drivers fluctuate to some degree, the ones I've mentioned here are the main drivers we're looking at on the revenue side. And on the expenditure side, there are also many drivers that affect our forecast, including COLAs, inflation, minimum wage impacts, and of course, PERS rate increases. While inflation has remained at low levels for a very long time, this driver can have a great impact on materials and services, as well as COLAs, which generally follow CPI. The FY17 proposed budget forecast includes an inflationary factor of 2.1%. A potential downside risk exists if inflation rates rise. A 0.5% increase over the rates we currently have in the forecast equate to about an $8.5 million increase in expenditures over the entire forecast period. Staff closely watches the quarterly Oregon economic and revenue forecast put out by the state economist, and will closely track and update inflation assumptions over time. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about the minimum wage impact. The state of Oregon passed legislation mandating higher minimum wage, which will be phased in over time. This impacts the city in several ways. Staff has estimated that the impact of higher hourly rates paid to temporary employees employed directly by the city, and those impacts have been incorporated into this forecast to reflect the minimum wage increases over inflation as they are fully implemented. This primarily impacts recreation staff, and increases above inflation range from $7,000 to $34,000 annually over the forecast period. However, there are other ripple effects from having a higher minimum wage, and we haven't yet quantified those. And those include the impact of higher minimum wage on contracts, including the contracts the cities have with temporary staffing agencies. And another potential impact may be the upward pressure on hourly wages. So as temporary employees receive higher wages, they're resulting from the minimum wage increase, their wages may be equal or greater than people supervising them. So we'll have to monitor that and address that potentially in the future. And then finally, there's PERS rate increases. Great uncertainty exists. We'll talk in more detail about that in just a little bit. So now we'll turn to property taxes. Property tax revenues can be uncertain as future revenues are dependent upon what happens with the economy and the dynamics of the property tax system. When we look to the future to forecast property tax growth rates, a variety of factors are taken into consideration, including current information from the assessor that we receive each October, trends on property values, housing, and building activity. This graph shows the number of new taxable building permits. This is a key indicator we use each year to help inform our projections on growth. This excludes permits for public projects or tax exemptions, as those projects don't add to the tax rate. So generally, it takes about 2 years from the time a permit is pulled to the time the property comes onto the tax rolls. If you look in the graph, you can see the spike in FY14, which correlates to the higher property tax revenues we're receiving this year in FY16. Our property tax revenue growth is 5.1% for FY16, but we don't expect to maintain that growth level moving forward. As you can see, if you look to where the line is in FY15, permanent issuance slowed, and we have assumed a slower level of property tax revenue growth in 17 and beyond. So if we take all that information I just talked about, including building permit activity, and model a range of possible outcomes, we do that based on optimistic, moderate, and pessimistic growth assumptions. When we incorporate those rates into the forecast, we don't want to be too optimistic because we don't want to assume we're going to receive revenues that we can't achieve. And at the same time, we don't want to be too pessimistic and make decisions now that we don't have to make based on that level of uncertainty. So this slide shows the range of potential outcomes across the forecast period. The blue line represents our current forecast, and this assumes a moderate growth rate of just over 4%, about 4.2, and it assumes the economy continues to improve and growth occurs over time. These trends are similar to trends in this chart that you've seen over the past couple of years, and while you can see all the projections are fairly close to the left in the first couple of years in the forecast, the uncertainty grows as we look to the right. We have also adjusted the forecast assumptions for delinquent property tax payments or revenues. Until this winter, we were assuming delinquent property tax revenues of about $2.3 million per year, and that's what we were receiving. That was our history through the recessionary period. As we monitored delinquent revenues this fiscal year, our receipts are coming in at a lower level. We've actually reduced our current year projection by about $1 million, and we've reduced our forecast assumptions in the out years by about $700,000. And this kind of reflects a more pre-recessionary level of collection. So our assumptions have been reduced. And then finally, with Comcast, there's some future uncertainty regards to property tax we receive from Comcast, really on two fronts. One is the property tax appeal we've talked about before. So in tax year 2009, Comcast appealed a significant increase in their taxable assessed value. This appeal has been in the courts for several years and still hasn't been fully resolved. And then the second is a gigabyte exemption. Comcast applied for a central assessment exemption under recently passed legislation. This legislation allows telecom companies to qualify for a property tax exemption if the company offers high-speed internet service. Comcast applied for this exemption and was granted the exemption by the Oregon PUC, Public Utilities Commission, and that exemption was forwarded to the Department of Revenue, who will make an ultimate determination. The Department of Revenue has not yet made their decision, and we haven't been able to get information quantifying what the impact would be to the city if that decision is made. So depending on the outcomes of these pending matters, the Comcast assessed value could be reduced. So now we'll take a look at general fund expenditures and forecast drivers. The general fund operating budget is $138 million, or about 3.8% over the FY16 adopted budget. The increase is due to normal inflationary increases, plus some targeted investments that the city manager will talk about in just a bit. The two primary categories, of course, in the operating budget are personnel and materials and services. And as we're a service-driven organization, most of the services we provide are provided by people. So 77% of our operating budget is on the personnel side. So the FY17 proposed budget does include an additional 27 FTE, the majority of which support the implementation of the library levy, which the city manager will also address later. Our population is increasing along with service demands, so we remain at a low level of 8.9 FTE per thousand, even with the additional positions added in the FY17 proposed budget. As I mentioned previously, a major forecast driver on the expenditure side are PERS rate increases. 2014 was the last year, or was the year of our last valuation, so we're showing the change here from 2013 to 2014. We will receive our 2015 valuation this coming November. So if you think back to last year, you may remember that last spring, the day after the city manager presented his proposed budget, the decision was handed down in the Morrow case, which overturned most of the changes made by the 2013 legislature on the PERS system. So this table here shows the breakdown of recent changes, including the impact of the Morrow decision that have led to the projected increase in the PERS unfunded accrued liability, or UAL. The result of the court decision is just over half of the increase, but other factors are also impacting the UAL, which are administrative decisions by the PERS board around mortality assumptions and a lower assumed investment earnings rate. Additionally, investment returns are below the assumed earnings rate. The revised earnings rate is 7.5%, and actual experience for 2015 was 2.1%. And here we're showing the change in the employer rates we're anticipating in the forecast as PERS rates increase over the next 6 fiscal years. PERS rates can change every 2 years and in even years. We are relatively certain about the rates we are showing in FY18 as we've received advisory rates from our actuary. But as we look to the future, in 20 and 22, they involve greater assumptions because rates are driven in large by performance of equity and bond markets, so greater uncertainty as we look to the future. In our forecast, we're assuming the maximum rate increases under the current PERS system over the next 3 biennium. If investment earnings rise, then these assumptions could change, but we are being realistically conservative in making these projections. And then the point of this slide really is to say, as we look out into the future, the uncertainty grows, which causes our forecast predictions to become less reliable. We have no controls over the forecasts that shape our PERS costs and rates, but we will be closely monitoring changes and adjusting our forecast as more information becomes known. So once we incorporate all of the updated variables, assumptions, and the FY17 proposed budget decisions into the forecast, the revenue and expenditure lines are shown here. One of the city's goals is to live within our means, which translates into revenues being greater than expenditures over the forecast period. And while we don't achieve that goal with this forecast, this is primarily due to PERS rate increases. Expenditures are higher in FY17 due to targeted one-time spending proposals that the city manager will talk about in just a bit. And as you can see, we're in alignment in years 18 and 19 and out of alignment in 20 and 22. So as we've said before, we don't want to overcorrect now for things that may or may not occur in the future. There are many upside and downside risks to forecast variables that we'll be monitoring over time. Fortunately, we're in the financial position to wait and see how these things unfold rather than taking action now. So one of the reasons we're able to pause and see how things unfold is really due to the hard work of this group and the organization and all the things we've achieved over the past 7 years to balance the service system and maintain reserve levels. The green line shows the reserve for revenue shortfall from last April. Remember, this doesn't include the impacts of the Morrow decision. The blue dotted line shows our revised forecast, including updated forecast assumptions and FY17 budget decisions. Remember also that the target for the reserve for revenue shortfall is 8%, or about $12 million. So 8% of general fund expenditures, which translates to about $12 million on average over the forecast period. After incorporating all of the things I mentioned, the FY17 proposed budget reserve for revenue shortfall is $7 million, or about 4.9%. So as we move through the forecast period, reserves are now projected to significantly decline as we use reserves to soften the financial impacts from anticipated PERS rate increases. Under current forecast assumptions, we expect to be below target levels throughout the forecast period, with the reserve being exhausted by the end of the 6-year time period if no actions are taken. Of course, we won't let this picture unfold. If these trends hold, we would take action in the future to maintain financial stability. The action needed to address this future gap shown in this picture would be about between $1 and $2 million. That action would align revenues and expenditures, keep us on a stable path, and ensure adequate reserve levels. However, as I said before, we don't want to overcorrect now for future uncertainties, and we can remain steady and closely monitor all the forecast drivers as we look into the future. And now the city manager will discuss the FY17 proposed budget.
So again, remember the proposed budget really is about, from our perspective, it's steady, no gap to fill. I'll talk about some modest target investments. As Twyla mentioned, we are monitoring uncertainty in a variety of places, and as those continue to play themselves out, we'll bring that back to the committee. And then, of course, living within our means becomes and remains an important part of the budget for us. So here's what we're recommending for ongoing general fund changes. We have them in two different places. Those that are revenue backed, I'll talk about those first, and then I'll jump up to the top. And so the revenue backed means that you don't spend the money unless the money comes in. And a good example of that is the spay and neuter clinic operations. They perform almost 3,000 spay and neuters every year, and that's gone up over the last 3 years, about a 24% increase. And so what this projection of dollars is for supplies and materials and shots and vaccinations and those kinds of things. And so if the demand requires it, this allows them to meet that demand with the supply of services and materials that they need. If the demand is not there, then those dollars are not spent. And so that's a net zero impact on the general fund. The second is similar to that, just nuisance abatement contractual services, and that's where we contract to have a variety of nuisances abated, and if we don't need to hire somebody or contract for those, then we don't spend the money. Therefore, the demand's not there, so therefore we don't have to provide the supply. So that the revenue back's about $150,000. The ones up top are those that are not revenue backed. They're just into the general fund in general, and they represent just under $70,000. Think about a general fund budget that's $138 million on an operating side. We're just recommending an ongoing increase in funding of about $70,000, so very minimal. The top one is the downtown portable restrooms and hand washing stations. If many of you know that over the past several years, those have been a series of one-time allocations or appropriations by the committee and the council. And so what we have said is let's just build those in as an ongoing going forward. We know that the portable restrooms, this is not a permanent solution. There have been conversations at the council and other places that a long-term permanent solution is needed, but what this does is to ensure that at least what's there now maintains in the budget and would be an ongoing appropriation as we move forward. There's a couple other pieces there. I know the municipal court judge's salary increase, that's really in response to the council. The judges' salaries, the minimum wage impact, of course, is through state legislation, and then the police auditor's office requested an additional $6,000 for investigative services, so that's also built in as an ongoing add for the budget.
Just a clarifying question on this slide, if I may. So revenue backs, meaning that these two line items make us money that we then turn around and...
No, what this says is we appropriate the money. If you need to go buy the supplies, you have the money to buy the supplies with, and then they charge that back out to the spay and neuters get charged, and so they recapture those dollars.
As does the nuisance abatement.
Yes,
So both of these should be a wash if it all works out.
correct. They're net zero. But you have to appropriate the dollars or there's no money that they can use to provide the service. Then the one-time general fund changes are really trying to do a couple of things. One is, the first one on the World Championships funding is really to try to take advantage of an opportunity, really a once-in-a-generational opportunity coming to Eugene in 2021. Many of you know that the World International Track and Field Championships in 2021 will be the largest sporting event in the world that year. And in any given year, it's the third largest behind the Olympics and the World Cup. So it's a pretty significant deal that the world has chosen Eugene to host this event. There'll be a couple of thousand athletes, plus all the support services and the coaches and the families and the fans that will be here. They anticipate upwards of 3,000 media. And so it's a pretty big deal for us here in Eugene. And what we're trying to represent with this appropriation, we don't have a specific plan on how those dollars will be spent. These are not dollars that would be spent or not intended to support inside the fence operations, meaning these would not be dollars in which Tracktown would be anticipating or have some expectation to support their operations inside the fence. These would be funds that, from a city perspective, if there's opportunities that come up in order to advance the championships or to provide a legacy or an opportunity for the community, there's dollars appropriated to provide those kinds of things. So it's not intended or an expectation that they support the Tracktown operation. The urban reserve planning, this is really the city council last year, as part of Envision Eugene, gave direction to start proceeding with urban reserve planning. At the time, we mentioned we would need to come back and appropriate dollars to be able to start that work. So these are the dollars in response to that council direction to put those in place. The body camera matching grant funding, this also came to the council previously, that there was a matching, 50% matching grant. And so this is also in response to where we're headed with the policing for this 21st century. Replacement of recreation program software is a one-time funding for the recreation. They have what they call for classes, registration and scheduling software. It's pretty antiquated, out of date, and this just replaces that. So it's a much easier experience for those that are signing up for classes and at our community centers. And then the Community Justice Initiative, I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then Green Hill contract increase. This is just a one-time funding to address some increased contract costs associated with the operation of the First Avenue Animal Shelter. Last year during the Budget Committee, there were some conversations about animal services and shelters, and Lane County is continuing. They're having some conversations and some work around what to do with aging facilities in general. We're participating in those conversations. There's nothing that's come out of that yet that would be presented either to this group or to the council, so there's early stages of those conversations. Then the police officer or police auditor's office limited duration position, what they've requested is some additional dollars to help support their current position, and that's where you see that $50,000 there. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Community Justice Initiative, because I think it's an opportunity to work with a variety of partners in the community to do a couple of things. And all of you know that very recently there were 10 cities nationwide that received $200,000 worth of grants. We received that in support of our community court. And so we want to just supplement that with another $100,000. And really the intent of the Community Justice Initiative is to respond to quality of life crimes by either having the offenders pay back the communities they've harmed through community service, or provide a pathway to wellness for folks to really move out of the public safety system or the public justice system into much more of a human services, social services network. And so it's really trying to provide an alternative path to the public justice system. And so it does really a couple of kinds of things. When we say community-based problem solving, what happens, or what we hope happens, and from models in other places in the country, somebody may enter into what is now the court system. So there's the police presence, there's the court system, there's the prosecution, and that whole system. What we'd like to do is try to implement many of those early, move them into this other network in which there's a community-based, meaning there are a variety of services and people within the network that immediately are able to try to help people on a different path. So, for example, if housing is one of their concerns, let's try to move them into housing. If there's substance abuse, let's try to address those kinds of things as opposed to have them continually repeat back in this public safety system. So we're trying to do that. Models in other parts of the country have shown that you reduce crime and recidivism because you're trying to address some of the underlying causes of some of the behavior as opposed to just recycling folks through the system. And so as you see, it's individualized treatment, and you're trying to get through the system pretty quickly, and it requires a high degree of cooperation and partnership with a variety of agencies and organizations, and so we're in the working through them. And so what we're wanting to do is pilot that kind of a program through the grant and this additional $100,000 worth of project. I talked about the track and field championship there already. And then for the library staffing, for the expansion, this is really in response to the community. The services that they asked for was additional hours in the downtown library as well as out in the branches, more materials. And so what you see is what we said we would provide as part of that levy. So there's an additional almost 18.5 FTE in support of those services. And, of course, that's a 5-year levy. And so there's 27 FTE proposed in the new budget increase. All of them are revenue backed in the sense of this is new revenue coming in to support these 18.5. Cultural services, this is also revenue backed, meaning an increase in the number of tickets sold will support the additional almost 5 FTE. And this is, I think this is really good news from the perspective of, based on the economy and the work over at the Holtz Center, what they're able to do is grow their performances, particularly bringing back some of the Holt Presents, a series that went away many years ago. And so there's the ability to add 40-plus more events, requires a variety of people to support that. So again, this is revenue-backed FTE ads. And then all the other proposed FTE ads, again, are revenue-backed. And so the part of the story is that of the 27 FTE that are being proposed, none of them are just general fund ads. They're all revenue-backed FTE. And so we can get into any one of these if it's important on the details. But, for example, when you have construction-related activity, what that means is we do anticipate our construction activity to continue to increase. Although you see the permitting's down, it's to continue to increase. It doesn't mean it's decreased. It's just increasing at a slower rate. And so to get those turned around and out the door, that becomes important. On the downtown, on the parking fund, no FTE, but that's part of the technology that we want to implement in order to increase revenues. As I mentioned with the parking fund, they're doing well on the operating and on the revenue and expenditure on a year-to-year basis, but the accumulation in order to provide capital projects, this is one way to start balancing that out. Closed captioning for the council meetings and all, we're proposing that, and then some increases in our business loan fund. I want to talk just briefly about human services funding and provide an option for your consideration. I think for those that have been on the budget committee for any numbers of years, we have two different components of HSC funding. And HSC is that portion of dollars that we send over, or allocate to the Human Services Commission that's run by the county or organized by the county. These are undesignated, unallocated funds. And then generally what they do with those dollars is they accumulate them with other dollars that they've received, send out requests for proposals to any variety of agencies, receive responses back to meet specific needs, and then they allocate the dollars that they have. And so there's two types. There's ongoing, and then there's one time. And the ongoing is that portion which is in our budget. We anticipate to be in the budget every year as we go until the budget committee or the council or some financial situation requires us to stop that. The ongoing support in the 16 budget and, again, is in the recommended 17 budget is $610,000. And then there's a one-time piece, which over the years the budget committee and the council have approved additional one-time dollars to help supplement the HSC ongoing piece. In the FY16, that's $250,000, so it's $860,000 in the FY16 budget. An option that we would suggest that you might consider as you think about this, one would be you may still want to allocate the one-time $250,000 for this year, but then as we go forward, I think what we would suggest is stabilize the ongoing at $100,000 more than what is currently sort of that stabilized. So rather than $610,000 of ongoing, we make that $710,000. But then the other $150,000 gets picked up not as one time as we go year to year, but really is made as a priority for any marginal beginning working capital that shows up as SB1. And make that a high priority, and then that $150,000 would be the first dollars that come out of that particular fund. Right now, as you know, the highest priority is that $900,000 capital transfer. But this would make this, or could make this the highest priority. I think from our perspective, what it does is it actually stabilizes the ongoing at a higher amount, so there's an easier time of that. Then the additional $150,000, and as we know with marginal beginning working capital, with few exceptions, there's some marginal beginning working capital at the end of the year, and those are really unanticipated funds that are not appropriated or allocated, and so they could be available for any numbers of things, and this would just say that the first priority would be this $150,000. And so from an HSC perspective, you would have some expectation of $860,000 every year, a little bit more of it actually stabilized. From a budgeting perspective, it adds a little bit on the ongoing support, but then what would have been one time shows up as this unanticipated revenue. And so the outcome's the same. From a budget perspective, we think it just makes a little bit more sense to do that. So that would be an option for your consideration as we think about that $250,000 in HSC funding. And then one of the things that we just want to kind of remind folks is there are any numbers of things that are continuing on in the ongoing operations, and that the council is involved in, and that we're working on in response to any numbers of initiatives and plans. These are just a couple of highlight, and the purpose really is to suggest that there's many things that are happening. The multi-year financial plan, as you know, is one of those documents that this committee and the council take a look at, that we're constantly updating and working and making progress towards. And so then lastly, I think it's just a reminder that from our perspective, the principles that we've employed over the time have worked. We continue to make strategic investments. We're mindful of what's happening into the future. And FY17 is a steady, stable budget. It's conservative but responsible, and we continue to live within our means. So there you go.
Thanks, John. First, we'll start with any clarifying questions before we enter our discussion. Does anyone have any clarifying questions for the city manager? Betty?
Clarified one is, I think Twyla said that with the rise of the minimum wage, people might be making more than the supervisors. Do we have supervisors who are making less than the minimum wage?
As the increase occurs over time and the phased approaches, there could be out in the rec department, there could be a situation where a lower level employee is in supervising some temporary employees, and with the minimum wage increase, they could equal or maybe be slightly above the supervisor at some point in time. So we would be.
Is that because the supervisor is salaried?
Pardon?
Is that because the supervisor is salaried?
I'm not sure.
It doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, it could be an hourly.
Probably hourly. And so, when you're, particularly in our seasonal ranks, or any numbers of seasonal and part-time employees that we have, particularly in our recreation department. And so in the out years, as the minimum wage increases from what supervisors currently make, that gap gets smaller, so you want to maintain that gap. And so it may mean that there are others that also will need to be bumped up that are already above minimum wage.
Thank you.
Councilor Brown, did you have a clarification?
Actually, it's not a clarifying question. I'll wait for discussion. Thank you.
No, waiting in the queue for discussion.
Okay, any more clarifying questions?
I have a question. I assume it's clarifying. I don't know. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the 2021 track. I know you said that you don't know exactly what that will be spent for, but given that that's 5 years out, could you talk a little bit about why that's in the budget now and whether that's something you anticipate being then every year between now and 2021?
I'm not anticipating it being every year. What we would anticipate is that there could be projects, for example, that take more than 1 year in preparation for the games, and so there may be things that would want to get started in the current year in anticipation that they would be finished by that time. So we don't know what those are specifically, but the idea is this is a pretty significant opportunity for the community, and so it's a way to at least start identifying, here's a resource, and so as we collectively start identifying opportunities, there's the ability to actually move forward on them. So, and we're not anticipating that being anything other than this year.
So now we'll move into the discussion portion of the meeting. You'll have up to 3 minutes per member per round. The timer will indicate the time left. The yellow light indicates that you have 30 seconds remaining, and the blinking red light indicates the end of the 3 minutes. So first in the queue I have Will and then Laura. Will, go ahead.
So I have a number of thoughts on this budget. First of all, thank you for your work as always, and I'm happy that we don't have a long road ahead of us of figuring out what to cut. So that's a relief. So the first thing that really jumped out at me when I before today when I was reviewing the materials was the $500,000 for the World Championship funding, contrasted with the $55,000 for the neighborhood newsletter that's not in the budget. So that to me, that contrast just kind of spoke quite a bit about what are our priorities as a city, and I have a hard time justifying a mystery $500,000 to the track and field championships planning without taking care of our existing neighborhoods. I see the value in planning for the long term and saying, let's build something amazing. Let's make sure that our community is ready. And as I travel to other communities and see the famous things that have been built in other cities to mark famous events that have happened. Seattle Space Needle is a great example. It's still there. Who knows what we will do to mark this event happening in our city. So I'm not entirely opposed to the concept, but a blanket 500,000 now without an oversight body or a, I mean, where's the money going to? Who's managing it? What? Huh? Magic. And then I would very much like to see the neighborhood services funded. As far as the Human Services Commission funding is concerned, that was the third thing on my list here. You had mentioned that you weren't sure how much marijuana revenue we were going to get. To me, that's a pretty natural fit. If we get more marijuana revenue, we should prioritize that for the HRC, so HSC. All right. I'll end early for now and respond if you'd like to, or we can, I don't know. So.
All right, so we'll have Laura and then Councilor Brown.
Thanks. Really appreciate the work, as always, that goes into this. I know it's a lot of work for the staff to prepare all these projections, and I'm excited that we're not facing millions of dollars that we're trying to fill a hole with. I would like to echo a little bit what Will spoke to, which is around the neighborhood services. I was disappointed to see that $52,000 removed from the 2017 budget forecast. I think neighborhood and organizations are places where probably many of us around this table started our civic engagement. I think they're a bedrock of this community. They're how we get to know our neighbors. They're how we communicate with one another. And they're pipelines for bringing people into civic engagement on boards and commissions in the city. So I very much would like to figure out a way that we can continue to fund the newsletters and outreach that those neighborhood organizations need to do. So I will certainly be looking for a way for us to find what seems relatively scant in the scope of hundreds of thousands of dollars money to fund those things. So, thanks.
Councilor Brown and then Ken.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. I have to admit, I just have to say I was pretty shocked to see this $250,000 being cut from the Human Service Commission again. And I was pretty shocked to see the $55,000 cut from neighborhood services. I mean, we went through that last year. Actually, I think it needs to be increased a little bit, because I was at a meeting of South Willamette Neighbors recently, and there was the editor of the Friendly Area Neighbors newsletter. They can only afford to do 3 a year. They want to do 4, but they can only afford to do 3. So I think that certainly someone's going to restore this funding, and it should probably be maybe $60,000, I don't know. And it should be ongoing and just never even considered as a basic thing that we want to always support, as should the Human Services Commission. We shouldn't have to go through this year after year. I mean, we had a presentation at our council work session today, on the Eugene Springfield Consolidated Plan for homelessness and building low-income housing, and we see the need, and maybe they'll be able to build 55 units this year, maybe. It'll just be crippling to cut this money from the Human Services Commission, and I would like to actually, of course, restore it, but on an ongoing and not make it a temporary thing year by year, so we have to keep going over this every year. But I'd like to restore it to the FY11 levels, which are about $1 million a year. And I think we ought to altogether try to figure out a way to do that, because that would be dynamite. There's 2 other topics I think that I want to discuss and perhaps make motions. I think we need to find funding for at least one 24/7 cahoots man. I was stunned to I think some of the other counselors were too. I just assumed that at least one of them was 24/7. They're not. We don't have one. And Mr. Babb was killed during the off hours, and there was a very serious confrontation with a mentally disturbed son and his mom at their house in the off hours. And so I think this is a priority for public safety. And also, I think it's really important. I want to propose adding, I'm not sure what percentage of an FTE for a stenographer to cover our meetings again, like we used to have. It's very important for citizens to be able to read the minutes of our meetings. If you look at them now, they're totally meaningless. It's nothing. It's a one sentence. It doesn't say who said what. So you go online, oh, I will read the minutes. Good luck. They're virtually worthless. And I think this was, during the rough years, a few years ago, I understand why it was done, but we're not in those years anymore, and I think we can afford to restore that. So I think it was a false economy. It turned out to be a false economy in the current conditions. Thank you.
Can I just make a couple of comments? One on the neighborhood piece. I would agree that if it's an important piece, then I would encourage you just ask to be as an ongoing expense, because one of the challenges is when we're at the budget committees and something like that, there was lots of this conversation last year, and the budget committee said we want to make that a one-time expense, and so you make it a one-time expense, and then we come back and have the conversation every year, similar to the 250 with the human services. What we're suggesting is a way that it becomes much more like an ongoing 250. It's a little bit different way to get there, but essentially it achieves the same outcome. And so I would suggest for the neighborhood it's the same way. If there's an intent to do that ongoing, then you should just make that as an ongoing as opposed to 1 year every year, and then we'll just put it into the budget every year.
So Ken and then Josh.
I also want to speak to the human services funding, and I want to echo a little bit of what Councilor Brown just said. The current funding that's proposed, I certainly support. The $610,000 and the $250,000 one time. I also would like to see the $250,000 made ongoing to the extent possible. But I believe that amount is the same as what it was last year, and I think it's also the same as it was the previous year. And you do have to go back to fiscal year 12 it was closer to $1 million on the ongoing and about $1.2 million, including the one-time. I'd like to suggest that the council and the budget committee consider increasing the city general fund allotment by about $100,000 this year. And with the goal of coming back to the FY12 amount in the next 2 or 3 years, of gradually ratcheting it back up to where we were historically. The money we allocate, as you know, is combined with general fund allocations that come back from the county and come back from Springfield. As has been mentioned, they're distributed by the HSC to nonprofits in the area. And these agencies are able to provide capable and pretty direct support to help people who need help in our community. This model, as I've gotten more and more familiar with it, I think is particularly effective, and it's a pretty interesting model. It might even be a bit unique, and I think we should try to restore funding to help support it. There's a couple of reasons, a couple of benefits. One that it's been talked about quite a bit, but I think its real benefit is the money that's allocated through the HSC to these nonprofits is leveraged. And for the dollars that can go to those nonprofits, they can go out and get additional funding from federal sources or from state sources or from private grant sources. They can also get in-kind support. So the leveraging has quite a bit of value. And it's also, I think, good to point out that as this money is spent by these nonprofits, aiding people who need this help in the community, a lot of it, some of it, is typically spent for people who need help on an emergency basis. And if we can, we're getting a position to help them more on a proactive basis, or more before it's an emergency. And I think providing that support, I guess I understand doing it that way doesn't necessarily create cost savings in the public safety cycle, but in fact, I think it does free up the police and emergency responders on that reactive end from having to provide that and allow them to do other important work. I want to say I'm proud. I think it's great, the overall human services work that the city does. in the larger context, but I would like to see some consideration given on this piece, the human services, to restoring this particular funding. I think we're seeing some increasing revenues, and I think it's not a lot of money, and I think we could afford to restore to these historical levels. So I'm not here with a specific recommendation tonight. I thought I would put it out there and see what kind of support there is around the table, and to the extent there is support, maybe we can come up with a recommendation next week. So, thank you.
Josh and then Councilor Taylor.
Again, I'll just echo the thanks to budget staff. I really appreciate the clarity and organization of the documents. Most of my questions are, and I have a list that'll go beyond this time, really are about clarifications because of the brevity. First, just to echo things that have been said, especially what Will said about the neighborhood newsletters and grants, that $55,000 does seem like it should be permanent. It would also be, I just feel like we should point out the tension between our sort of cutting this on autopilot right now and the failure of public engagement on South Willamette. This seems like the wrong time to be cutting one of our few tools for reaching the population, reaching neighbors all over the city. I guess I would appreciate hearing from staff about this expenditure in the context of other changes to public engagement that have been discussed by planning staff. I know planning staff are working really hard on this. It would be helpful to have some connection between this expenditure and other money being spent to reinvigorate our ability to reach people on planning issues in particular. Second, and I've talked with planning staff about this to some extent, this slide on the MYFP is just sort of qualitatively alludes to things. We had an entire meeting on the multi-year financial plan last year. It would be really helpful to have some sort of more detailed update, kind of item by item in a summary sense, because I know there has been a lot of work on those, but I think that's just less transparent to all of us because it's harder to follow these things as they trickle out during the year. So we had a whole meeting. Let's have a real follow-up on that. Third, on the track and field championships money, that $500,000, I agree, again, with what Will said. There has been discussion over time about how, and you alluded to some of this, but there's been some discussion about not just doing things that are sort of a legacy thing or monument or something for the community, but also investments that advance the event, but that also advance strategic objectives of the community, like investments in transit or other sort of livability investments that sort of work from a tourist perspective. I think we really need to hear some clarity on that for something of this magnitude. And I also wonder how we could possibly be thinking about this as a one-year expense. It seems like we're going to be doing a ton of prep, and so just from a budget projection standpoint, it seems like we should have that. We should have some estimate of that. So we're putting this year's expenditure in the context of the multiple years that we're going to have serious outlays. Not that those are necessarily bad outlays, but we need more transparency on them and then a sense of where they're going. And then another particular element of that, and then I'll end it here, something specifically about mitigation for the most impacted neighborhoods would be helpful in particular. That's not going to be front of mind right now, years out, but that should be one of the categories.
Thanks. So Councilor Taylor and then Councilor Surratt.
Thank you. Top of my list was that $500,000. I don't think we should be spending that. I think if there's going to be some kind of monument, it should come from grants or gifts or something, but I don't think it's a city expense that can be justified considering the things that we're not doing. Neighborhood services is one of the top things we should be doing. And a big thing that $500,000 could do a lot of things, but a big thing that is a big lack that's been brought to our attention many times is an animal shelter. If any of you have been to the animal shelters, they're disgraceful. And we need to build a new animal shelter. And that's something that is an ongoing benefit to the community, and it's something we could be proud of, rather than whatever was thought of for this $500,000. One of my questions was, is this going to be every year? But that's already been asked. But I want to eliminate that and put some more money in for neighborhoods and consider an animal shelter. As for human services, I like the manager's suggestion of how to do it. And I also wanted to say, if we have decent wages, we will need less money for human services. It's people who are working for money that does not support them who need public support. And that's another disgraceful thing, that everybody should be paid enough that they can live on the money they get if they're working. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Surratt, and then I'm in the queue.
Thanks. So just some general thoughts and questions, no particular order. So on that $500,000 for the World Championships, I'm assuming it wouldn't all be spent on a monument. So can you speak a little bit more? I would assume you were thinking about amenities such maybe as public restrooms, bike ped improvements, lighting. I don't know if any of it was thinking ahead to public safety investments that we might need to make. But if we agree to keep that funding in here or any part of it, I would like to see a set of legacy public restrooms come out of it. And on the animal services piece, are you able to provide any more specifics about what you would imagine that $95K would go towards? Would it go towards some improvement in the infrastructure? And if you don't have that information now, could you bring it to a future meeting? Okay. I like the idea. I agree with the adding back of the $55K or perhaps $60 to neighborhood services, and would support that as an ongoing budget item. I'm interested, I don't have a proposal tonight, but of identifying a small amount of funding, and it could just be one time for this year, but I would like us to have a pot of money to support our rest stop program and actually help support new rest stops getting set up, because I know a big part of their struggle is getting funding to get started, and we support them with land. But if we're miraculously find a piece of land that's not city owned, I'd like us to be able to contribute financially to those. And I appreciate the discussion around the HSC funding and your idea for us to add some back to the base, but I also agree it's not enough. And I would like to get back to that $1 million we used to allocate there. I'd be willing to do it over time, but I think that's an important priority. And I also think your revenue projections on the marijuana tax are extremely conservative. Just saying.
So I'm in the queue next, and then Councilor Pryor. Thanks to staff and the city manager for putting this together and all your hard work. Really appreciate your effort. A couple of things. So the neighborhood funding, in general, I'm supportive of that. I'm very involved in my own neighborhood association. I would really, my experience with my neighborhood association is we have people who work full-time on our board, and sometimes the best we can do is get out a little postcard, and we don't spend all of our money on newsletters, and that's just the reality. But we could use that money to engage our community in an event that we already planned by providing maybe more free food that would draw more families or different options. So I guess I would like to just revisit how we restricted that money last time. I don't remember exactly, but I feel like it was just for newsletters, and maybe think a little bit beyond that this time to think like, should it be restricted or should it be for general engagement? Because I think we have a lot of creative folks in our community who could do different things with those funds. And then I'd also be curious if we do decide to restrict it. I know we have a lot of active neighborhoods and a lot of neighborhoods that aren't active at all. So did we use all that funding last year? That might be hard to figure out midstream, but any sense of how much we actually used would be helpful. In terms of the human services funding, I'm very encouraged to see the bump in ongoing, the proposed possible bump in ongoing spending. I would be very supportive of the $100,000 and very open to conversations about more. I think Ken highlighted the points very well. Those funds are leveraged. It relieves some stress on our public service folks. He said it much better than I'm going to say right now. So I'd be very in favor of motions around that area. And then finally, it's been touched on again, but I'm a little leery of the $500,000 without anything else surrounding that money for the track and field competition. That feels just a little strange to me. So anything that could be provided to clarify any vision would be great. Councilor Pryor, and then we'll go into, well, I'll check to see if anyone else wants in the first round. Okay, we'll start taking the cue for the second round.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate the budget that's been put together. I know that what we do is you put together a budget, you give it to us, we react to it, and then you go back and make what adjustments you need to make. So we seem to be on task for doing the way this is supposed to work. And I appreciate all the comments that have been made around the reactions to the budget so far. I probably agree with most of what I'm hearing. I think when you have an amount that is as large as $500,000 and are not able to say really what I plan to do with it, that it would naturally make people uncomfortable. And so they want to go, give me a little bit more about what you think you might use that money for, where you might think it would go. I think, and have that ready for us so we can react to it more completely would definitely be helpful. Also on the notion of human service funding, I think there's human service commission funding, and then there is also human service funding, which the city also does. And one of the things that we've been talking about a lot at the council level are some specific human service related issues that we would like to see some money behind. And I'm not really interested in taking Human Service Commission money and taking it away from them to use it on these initiatives, but I am interested in funding these initiatives. So I think maybe a more holistic conversation about the whole of human service funding would be helpful, so that we could say there is this amount for Human Service Commission, which we'll try to make whole and perhaps even expand some if we can. But there may also be some directed efforts that we really do want to do. I can think of sheltering opportunities, and Claire mentioned rest stops and some other kinds of things, cahoots vans, or a variety of human service related things that we may want to look at as a more directed effort with money, but it will require more money. So I think thinking about that will be an important part. And the last thing I wanted to mention was, we have talked a lot about the opportunity that we now have around changing the nature in which we interact with our community. In the neighborhood funding, I agree, that's an important part. But I think one of the things we've done a lot is notify and inform, and use that as the primary mechanism for interacting with our community. And I think we've learned that just notifying and informing isn't enough. And I spent a lot of time developing systems to engage people, which is a two-way system. And that's a lot more expensive. It's the right thing to do, but it costs more money. And so now, in the context of a budget conversation, we may want to say, if we really want to engage our community in some of the big stuff we need to do, what kind of money would it take and what kind of structure would it take to create true engagement? Asking the right questions, doing it the right way, getting to the right outcomes. And we've not really talked about it in dollars and cents, and I think a budget committee might be a good place to do that.
Anyone else for the first round? All right, then we'll have Will and Councilor Brown.
So I wanted to ask, kind of talk about process a little bit here. We've got 2 planned meetings between now and when we're done with this budget cycle, and we have had a very, very recent change in budget committee chair. And I'm curious if we are wanting to entertain motions at this meeting. Are we planning to have more city staff presentation at the next meeting before we entertain motions? I don't know what the planned process here is, and I feel vastly uninformed, given that we have waited until May to have our first real budget committee meeting.
You probably feel uninformed as well.
I'm going to look to Twyla and talk about that.
The agenda for next week's meeting, there's a public comment period, and then there will be 2 staff presentations, one on human services and the other on economic development, as well as time for deliberation by the committee. And at the final meeting on the 26th, there will be a public hearing, as well as the rest of the time for deliberation by this body and a recommendation to council on the proposed budget.
So that means we're primarily expecting motions for next meeting,
Right.
right? Is that,
And the following.
and the following, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I would say, are there things that you're obviously getting a lot of feedback from us. All of, not just John, but the rest of the budget committee or the budget staff, are you expecting to present anything different between now and our last meeting, or are you just going to wait until council gives you the final, till council does the final tweak? Okay, so let's say that today we all said, rah, rah, we want this $55,000 or $60,000 of neighborhood services money in the budget. And you would say, great, we'll put it in the budget because you voted for it. Or is it wait until the end of the month and council says, put it in the budget?
No, so what I would anticipate, like we've done in the past, the budget committee makes motions, and a motion could be put X amount of money into the neighborhood services. If the majority of the budget committee says yes, then that goes into a modified budget that goes to the council.
Okay.
So the budget committee makes the motions. Whichever motions pass get put into the budget that gets presented to the council.
Well, I will just do it now then. I move that we put $60,000 for neighborhood services newsletters into the budget as an ongoing expense.
Second.
Okay. So I'm going to look for a little
Discuss.
Okay, so we're going to discuss the motion. Does anyone have any comments or discussion points about the motion? So start with Josh and then Councilor Taylor.
Given the magnitude of this and the clear importance of it, I would hope that we could not discuss it for more than a few seconds. And if anyone has questions about the value of it, I refer you to last year's public comment, which was extremely eloquent and swayed a majority of us, large majority. That's my only comment.
Councilor Taylor.
I'm not sure that's enough money. I would prefer to wait till the next meeting and get more public comment about how much is needed, more comment from the neighborhoods.
Move to table?
Councilor Surratt.
So when you were asking your process question, Will, I was going to offer, we could put out intended motions. You could broadcast your intent of the motions that you might make. I appreciate Josh's comment, but it does stifle debate a little bit to announce you hope we don't discuss it. So I'll move to table until our next meeting.
Second.
That's not debatable.
Not debatable. Okay, so we call for a vote, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so move to table this motion. All in favor?
Sure.
Aye.
I'm okay tabling it.
Okay. All opposed?
We'll return.
Okay, the motion is tabled. We'll go back to the other queue. So we are at Councilor.
I'll yield my remaining time.
Okay, thanks. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Well, I have two questions that I'd like to know before next meeting. I'd like to know how much it would cost it would cost to have one of the cahoots stands 24/7. And I would like to know how much and what part of an FTE a stenographer would be to take accurate minutes for city council meetings,
Council
and work sessions. And then I just have a comment, an idea. I mean, we're going to restore the $250,000 on an ongoing basis to the Human Service Commission, I think, maybe, hopefully. We could actually we could bump that up to, add an extra $200,000. If we look at everyone's been talking about the World Championships funding, I would suggest, that's $500,000. I would suggest this year let's take $200,000 or $300,000 from it, leave a couple $100,000, spend a year figuring out what it's actually going to be for, what the improvements would be, and use the $300,000 for Human Service Commission, but also we could take $100,000 of that for human services in the city of Eugene, and we could use that for rest stops, porta potties, dumpsters. We could, you know what I mean? And we know that we need to do all that stuff. We don't really know what the $500,000 would go for. It's just a suggestion. Thank you.
So we have Josh and then Scott.
Okay, so I'll pick up on the list here. And these are just questions, and I don't know if you want to clarify now or in the next meeting or in between by email. Anything's fine with me. Urban reserves planning, $300,000 was in there for this time, actually for the next 2 fiscal years. It was also in last year's supplemental budget on page 2 of the AIS from December 14th, and now it's here for 2 fiscal years. To my knowledge, we didn't actually do that work last year, or maybe we started doing it, but some clarification about where that is, given that then that's $900,000 maybe over those 3 fiscal years, would be helpful to...
No, the intent is not 900,000.
It's just the 600s.
Right.
Okay. So a little more...
I'll get you more information.
Yeah.
It's not 900,000. I don't recall if it's exactly 6, but I know it's not 9.
Okay, great. That's helpful. And the additional detail will be. Just on the library, and you spoke to this just a little bit, the 18.4 FTE from the bond measure. I guess for transparency and sort of accountability on behalf of the community, it'd be helpful to see how it relates to the levy exactly. Is it just the levy? Is it replacing some previous general fund funded positions? It sounded like it wasn't. Okay.
No, it's all, the levy money is not replacing any other ongoing library money. And so it's new money into the system to provide the services for the levy, approved by the levy.
Okay,
by the voters.
that's helpful. And I've heard of past monitoring for levy expenditures. I don't know if there's any sort of plan for that at all. There is.
Yeah, that was part of the ballot.
Okay, all right. And will that show up as part of the budget process or just subsequent budget? Or is it separate?
It'll actually be reported back out to the council.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, moving on. So the rest of these are just clarifications of differences between line items from year to year. So there were consecutive year increases in personnel costs for central services, well above changes in FTEs or changes in inflation. I have details on this, but it was a little more than a 14% increase in personnel costs. And I'll give you all this. You don't have to get carpal tunnel writing all that down. But it was much more than the personnel cost increase for the city as a whole and for most other departments, so it'd be helpful to get some characterization of that. You can look division by division, but division by division doesn't really tell a story. If there's some way you could characterize this jump, it was a similar jump from FY15 to FY16, so it's a big increase over time, like more than a quarter. Similarly, in public works, there's a significant, modest increase in personnel services and a decrease in materials, and it just would be helpful to understand what that means in public works and whether that's a significant constraint on the ability of public works to meet its mission. And last personnel services line item jump, there's a roughly 50% jump in the in fire and emergency medical services in the division for Office of the Chief. And it would be helpful. There's no change in FTE. Helpful to know what that was. It was about $500,000. So all of those together are many millions of dollars. So some clarification on why those shifts happen would be helpful, and I'll wait until my next round.
Great, thanks. Scott and then Laura.
Yeah, I too just wanted to echo Councilor Brown's recommendation about getting some forecasts for a Cahoots van for 24/7. And then my earlier comments when I raised my hand were about the table, or the motion that was tabled. And it was, maybe we should start thinking about some of those restrictions and whether or not we want those if we fund the neighborhood newsletters and other things. Thanks.
Laura.
Great, thank you. So I want to echo, I think it was Councilor Pryor who recommended that we really try to take a holistic look at human services. And I appreciate that. I think that would really help us to understand the Human Services Commission dollars, other human services projects that are in the works and what those may cost. And I guess I would also like to better understand, just maybe for myself, a similarly holistic understanding of the city's community engagement resources and personnel and tools. I see some things in here under central services. There are some FTE allocated to community engagement services, collaborative services. There's something under planning called, community development, and there's some FTE there. And so it would help me understand what portion might be appropriate for neighborhood services as opposed to what other tools and personnel we have allocated to do community engagement. I don't have a whole sense of how that works, but I very much agree with the comments that was made that that's something we need to keep looking at doing a better job of, especially given the changes that are coming down the pike, the things we anticipate spending money on, the trade-offs we hope to make, and helping people understand what those are. And then my final comment is that I would also just request that when you do come back with whatever you do know about this $500,000 and what those plans may look like, whether that's this year or for future years, living in a neighborhood that is adjacent to Hayward Field and knowing what that will look like, because I've experienced it even on the smaller track events. I would agree that whatever we can do to have some piece of that be for mitigation of the effects on those near neighborhoods, I think would be both really important for those neighborhoods, improve the experience of visitors, and enable more buy-in from people in the community. So I would just encourage that thinking. Thanks.
Anyone else for round two? Anyone else at all?
I'll eventually, but go ahead.
Go ahead, you want to respond?
I'm just going to talk a little bit about the World Championships, but I've been waiting till after.
Josh.
More? Okay. So, round three. There were large swings in the Community Development Fund, Fund 170. The FY16 adopted, FY16 supplemental, and the projections for they're all over the place, and maybe I just need to understand it, but there are big amounts of money, like millions of dollars. I read that section like 3 times. I don't know exactly what's going on. Big enough to matter, so it would be helpful to get a little more clarification in the next round. It would be helpful just to speak to, if you could say something about this format. I've heard some complaints from community members that the budget has gotten thinner and thinner. I personally, as a budget committee member, do not necessarily complain about that, wanting to do all my homework, but it does seem like it can be arbitrary. So if you could just speak to that at some point. Is it the bare minimum that state law requires? I think it's more, but it'd be helpful to hear. And then also, I noticed that expenses related to the library levy showed up, but I couldn't figure out, it was a couple $100,000 in total. I couldn't figure out why they were in FY16 when it seems like all of that would have been incurred before. So if you could just speak, someone could speak briefly now or next time, to the magnitude and the timing of the 2 different items, one for about $170, one for about $30,000. And then just a final overarching comment. I wouldn't expect it in this budget, but let me sort of repeat my concern from last year that I'll carry forward for the next couple of meetings. I think the budget document is great as a budget document, and when I praised its clarity, it was totally sincere. But it is, to my mind, disappointingly disconnected from major policy objectives. And you even speak to Envision Eugene in the budget message, which I appreciated. You speak to some other major initiatives by the city, but it still remains opaque as a document that measures progress toward major policies that we're pursuing. There are some acknowledgments of some new things, like in the Public Works Strategic Work Plan, there's a quick acknowledgment of Vision Zero. That was from a council resolution, but it's really brief, and there's nothing really connected to the budget itself. And this is even true for some of the items that have been proposed, the Community Justice Initiative. It seems to me that, actually, you didn't say this explicitly, but there are many like high bang for the buck opportunities in there where we're actually saving money on human services or in the courts or something else. And it would be nice to have some message that reflects that, so we really know that we're being not just doing good things for the community, but being responsible from a budget standpoint as well. All right, I'll leave it there.
Any other comments, Manager?
Just a couple things. On the format of the budget, it might be a good conversation for either the council to have, it could be the budget committee if the council chooses that. At least since I've been here, the intent of the budget has never been one of articulating all the progress and all programs and initiatives, and then it comes to the budget committee, and then the budget committee evaluates all that. So that just hasn't been the practice. If the council would like to change that, then we should have a good conversation about that and might be able to reformat that in different ways. And so that's just so what you see is what has been, at least what I know, is sort of the progress of that. The budget has gotten skinnier, and our intent has been that those service profiles that used to be a part of the budget is to have those at a different place, advance of the budget, so you actually get that information before you get to the budget where you can't do anything, or it doesn't make sense. And so that's more of the intent, to talk about sort of programming and what's going on in the community, or initiatives in community in the various departments. And so it may be, it might be a good conversation to talk about how those get incorporated. Then I would just say on the track and field worlds, I'm hearing numbers of things and related to that. It's not intended to build monuments. It's not intended to build big structures. I think what it really is to try to see if there's opportunities moving forward. It really could be neighborhood impacts, near neighborhood impacts. If there are, my sense is there'll have to be dollars associated with that. It could be around transit. It could be around open space. It could be around how we want something in our downtown to look or feel. It could be some celebration. I don't know what that is. We won't know what that is in time to give an outline of that for this budget. Our intent would be there would need to be a lot more people engaged in that kind of a conversation than just a few people deciding what all that needs to be for this particular event. I think from my perspective, the 2021 game just offers an opportunity that probably won't show up, and we can either choose to have it a pretty neat track meet, or we can choose to do something within the community that makes us feel proud and pretty good about the community as we show that to the world. And so the intent is to, one, show intent. That's important to us. One way we show intent is by we actually appropriate dollars towards something. Another is to set a marker out there so that when we have the conversations about what that could or might want to be, there's some reality around, some hope that maybe something could move forward, whatever that happens to be. So that's really what the intent is. The intent is to put a marker. It's an intent to show intent. It's intent to provide a resource so as those conversations occur, they may generate something. And my assumption is there'll be lots of people that could be a part of that conversation. So that's what that's about.
Mayor Piercy. I'm trying to keep myself out of this conversation. I can't resist part of it. And I listen to you all, and because I care so much about the restroom issue, to me, you're inviting the world to come to your community. They'll have restrooms at the event, but we're hoping people will come to our community in a much broader sense than the event, and surely we want to be sure they have some of those kind of necessities that will make people be able to feel comfortable and utilize our community. So I just encourage us to think about things we already have as goals and see if we can accomplish some of those through our work on this event, because those kind of things may be the kind of monuments we'd all be interested in to last into the future.
May I ask a quick clarifying follow-up of that? So as I understand what you're saying, John, this $500,000, putting the marker out there, even though this is undefined, what this would be, is the opportunity for that conversation and that dreaming big to happen so that people don't say, well, we could do this, do that, but there's actually no money for any of those things. Is that?
I think that is an opportunity.
Okay.
I mean, how that conversation occurs hasn't been defined yet, but I do think there's opportunities inside and outside the organization to do that.
Thank you.
Josh.
I guess following on what was just said, I hear that, and I actually don't in any way contest the huge strategic and cultural and identity opportunity of the games. It's actually amazing that we have this opportunity. At the same time, the optics of $500,000 with no definition around it, not great right now in the community. And I think it really puts us in a tricky position for there not to be a little more definition, even more a bunch of clarity of objectives. And you spoke to some of that. Maybe putting some of that down on paper would help. But I think given that a lot of people are going to be predisposed because of mistrust that has built around certain big expenditures like City Hall, that people are going to be predisposed to see that $500,000 as money that's being spent with little accountability or being spent with, without really clear definition ahead of time. And it sounds like you can come up with some of that definition, and I think we should do that so we don't foster more mistrust.
All right. Any other comments?
I've got one real quick question. To try to clarify the discussion that we're having about the $500,000. That's one-time monies, and where did it come from? What fund? Do you remember?
It is one-time money. I didn't want to answer where it came from. I mean, it's...
What fund did we tap into?
Well, it's part of the general fund.
It's general fund
It's
money.
general fund money. So, the resources that are available after we fund the operating budget and the UEFB, and the reserves, I mean, whatever, just monies are there. I mean, it's definitely general fund.
We didn't actually lose any positions
No.
or any services because of that allocation.
Correct.
That's true. Yes, we did not. Or no,
Thank you.
we did not.
All right. Don't see any more hands. Okay. So we'll move into the wrap-up of this meeting. Next steps, the next meeting will be on May 18th. And at the beginning, there'll be an opportunity for public comments at 5:30. And if any committee members are contemplating motions, it would be great if you could send those to Twyla ahead of time. No one likes surprises. Any other wrap-up comments from staff or from the committee?
Great first meeting. Way to go.
Great. We're adjourned.
Applause. Not applause. No, it's good. Yeah.